As you're probably aware by now, a lot has been changing in the real estate market here, specifically in Anchorage, in the past couple of months, just with the talk of recession and everything else that's happening. How much has that impacted what we're seeing right here on the ground here in Anchorage? Can we expect to see any bigger changes going into the future here? My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm a local realtor with Keller Williams right here in South Central Alaska, and my mission is to help you to build an intentional and significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate. And today we're going to be talking about what's going on in Anchorage as far as the residential, the condo, and the multifamily market for the entire area, municipality of Anchorage, and looking within the past month. This continues to be a pretty interesting market to keep an eye on, as it is the largest market center in this entire state for what's going on as far as real estate goes. Before we get started though, do make sure you give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and let's go and jump into today's market update looking at the residential. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that there was about 390 homes that were on the market this time last year. For the month, we have the most current up-to-date information, which is going to be June. So there's about 390. Now there's about 380. So a little bit of a dip, not a whole lot though. The next thing that we're seeing, and this is actually something we'll talk about in more detail in the summary, but we had about 370 properties that closed this time last year in June, which was definitely a record for the month of June, at least for the past recent memory here. So it's about 370. This year, the past month, was about 302. So we're seeing that there is a pretty sizable decrease in the number of properties that have actually closed in the month of June. Now, the next thing that really stands out to me is the average sold price this year was about $424,000, and it increased to about $456,000, which means that we saw about a 7.5% increase year over date for what we're seeing up to the current time. So that is pretty significant, and we'll talk more about that in the summary. I know that's looking at the sold price is probably the reason most people actually check into these reports. So we'll talk more about that in the summary. Now, switching gears real quick, let's go and take a look at the condo market. Now, in the condo market in Anchorage, we've seen a pretty precipitous drop really for this entire year compared to where we were before. This time last year, we had about 230 condos that were on the market, and that was still on the low side for what we usually see. This time of June this year, we're actually seeing there's about 117, 113 condos that are available on the market. So like just pretty much cut in half from where we saw this time last year. And that is obviously pretty drastic. So the next thing that we see is that the number of sold units for condos actually went up despite that drastic price reduction. It went up from about 127 this time last year to 142 this year. So despite the drastic cut in inventory, still seeing an increase for the number of actual sold properties in the condo classification. Now, the next thing that we're seeing is that the sold price for the condos actually went from about $231,000 to about $238,000 for roughly 3.5% increase for the average sold price. So not a huge gain there. When people are buying condos, though, it's not really because they're going to appreciate really aggressively. They buy them for other reasons. But average sold price for condos has increased slightly over the year before. Let's take a break here real quick. For those of you who've been watching for a while, you do know that I host a podcast called the Alaskan Journey Podcast, where I interview people who have recently moved up here to Alaska or people who have lived up here a long time and talk about their experiences and what it's like actually living up here on the last frontier. If that's something that would interest you, do make sure to check that out in the description section down below. And it's a great time to kind of hear from more people besides just me about what it's like living up here and what everyone else is seeing. So do make sure you go check that out. If you're thinking about moving up here as well, do make sure you reach out to me directly on my website. Link for that, again, is going to be in the description section down below. And I actually do have a place where you can go click there, register to my website. Just make sure you put relocation guide in the description section, the little comment section, so I know what to send you. Now, let's go and finish today's market update looking at the multifamily market. What we see for the multifamily is this time last year, there was about 172 properties that were available on the market. Now we're looking at just 70 multifamily properties that are available here in Anchorage. Now, one thing I do want to point out, multifamily includes everything from the little duplex all the way up to the enormous commercial size apartment complex. So it really does incorporate a lot, but what we are seeing is that the inventory, what's available out there, is really taking a hit. year over date. Now, if we're looking at the number of multifamily properties that have actually sold, we see that that's actually decreased very slightly. There was 44 properties that sold this time last year, and now we see there are 40. So we do see a bit of a decrease, not a whole lot, and we would honestly expect to see proportionally that to be way down to like 20 or maybe even 25, properties that have actually sold, but there still remains pretty high demand. And so you're going to see that's really kind of hovering right about where it was last year, despite the inventory being cut so much. Last but not least, we see that the average sold price for multifamily properties here in Anchorage went from about $500,000 this time last year to about $525,000 year to date for this current year. And that is obviously just over 5% increase for what we usually see in properties for this area. That's kind of about what we would expect. We're seeing the average rents across the entire city is just ratcheting up. We would expect to see the value for these multifamily properties to be going up because the value of the property for a multifamily is tied more with what's going on in the rental market and how much a landlord get for their units than is, the quality of the countertops and whatever else it is that you're looking at. So it gets judged a lot differently than a residential house does. It's more about what it can actually produce, and if you have a lot of rental income coming in, the property is going to be worth that much more. Now, just looking at the summary across the board here, on the residential side, okay, Anchorage is one of the few markets we've seen where the number of properties that have actually sold from the year before has actually seen a pretty significant dip from where we were the year before. Inventory staying about where it is. Average sold prices obviously going up, and that is probably going to continue for the foreseeable future because despite whatever is happening in a recession or whatever is happening in the economy at large, supply and demand is really the most important thing. And as you can see in our inventory, there's still not a whole lot of supply out there. So for the people who are looking for houses, that just kind of is what it is. Get on the other side of it as quick as you can, buy a property so you're on the other side of that equation and you're enjoying seeing the market values go up. On the condo side, what we're seeing in this asset class is that we're starting to see more and more demand over here compared to where we've been in previous years. Because usually in the past, people were more than happy to go buy a single family home. They didn't really want to mess with a condo. That's not really why people moved to Alaska. But because so many people are having challenges getting into a single family home right now, a lot of people are switching gears and looking at condos, which those are becoming and more in demand. They're not, the market value for them hasn't shot up as they have with the other asset classes, but that's because it's a condo, and that's really not the reason people buy condos to begin with, for the appreciation that is. They buy it for the ease of maintenance, how simple it is to do everything, and that's really why you buy a condo. So I sure hope this has been useful for you. If it has, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Unfortunately, I think we're probably going to see more of the same moving forward. For those of you who are waiting for a market collapse, jump in while you can. Had you jumped in a couple of years ago when we were saying jump in, you would be sitting in a much better spot instead of waiting for this market to collapse, which it's not really backed up in the data that that's going to happen. I can't speak for other markets. I can speak for this one. Not really seeing it. I could always be wrong. No one's perfect, but I'm just not seeing it in this market. So I hope that was useful. Make sure to reach out to me if you have any questions. If you want to roast me, that's in the comment section down below.